When this aircraft appeared in the mid-1930s, it was the most advanced fighter in the world. And this fact was even more surprising because it was designed in the very much underdeveloped Soviet Union. It had many advanced features which were new at the time, and when the type entered service, most other nations still used biplanes. This was the Polikarpov I-16 fighter, so let's take a look at the history of this aircraft today. The story of this fighter starts in the early 1930s. This was a time when the advances in aviation technology reached a point when monoplane design started to surpass the performance of the biplanes used by most militaries around the globe. The Soviet Union was no exception, though they still introduced new aircraft in the early 1930s, which were conventional biplane designs. Many of these planes were designs of Nikolai Polikarpov, like the I-5 or I-15 fighters or the PO-2 trainer. He was a successful designer in the Soviet Union and rose amongst the ranks quickly during the 1920s. But when he received the task to develop the I-5 and I-6 fighters, and he couldn't meet the specified deadlines by the state, he and many other designers were arrested and charged with sabotage against the nation. He was initially sentenced to death under these fabricated charges, but apparently his expertise was too valuable, and the sentence was changed to 10 years of forced labor. He was moved to the Central Design Bureau 39, which actually together with the State Aircraft Factory 39 was a prison complex, and finished the I-5 design there. After a successful demonstration of the plane, his sentence was changed to a conditional one, and he was released in 1931, and thus was able to create the fighter we are looking at today. In 1932, the Soviet Air Force set new directives for a new fighter aircraft. The usual easy-to-meet specifications we would expect from the Soviet Union. The new design had to fit the country's industrial conditions and at the same time be better than any other fighter of the time around the globe. The first aircraft designed for these new directives was the Tupolev I-14. It was an advanced design, a wooden cantilever monoplane powered by a 570 horsepower Bristol Mercury engine, and featuring two 20mm cannons and two machine guns. Though it was an advanced design, there were doubts about its capabilities, so two biplane designs were ordered as backups. One of them, the I-14A model, was assigned to Polikarpov, and as it turned out, his design was actually better than the initial Tupolev one, and later it entered service as I-15. At the same time, he started working on his own monoplane design, which was very advanced for the time. It was a cantilever monoplane with a retractable landing gear featuring an enclosed cockpit and a variable pitch propeller. The armament was planned to be similar to the I-14 model, with two machine guns and two cannons. The work on the Polikarpov model started in June 1933, and the prototype TSKB-12 already made its maiden flight in December the same year. This aircraft, flying in 1933, built with all the modern features, was a great fit for the Soviet aviation, as most militaries around the world still used biplanes. In Germany, the Heinkel Hg-51 entered service around this time. In the US, the P-26P shooter appeared, which, though it was a monoplane, but still used bracing on the wings, with a fixed undercarriage and open cockpit. At first, radical new designs were opposed by the Scientific Test Institute of the Air Force, but eventually the designers managed to convince them. Though the Polikarpov design was planned to use the license-built version of the Wright Cyclone R1820 engine, rated at 710 horsepower, but the license negotiations were delayed so much that they had to settle for a less powerful 480 horsepower M22 engine, which was a license-built version of the Bristol Jupiter. Despite being underpowered, the prototype still managed to reach 360 km/h top speed, which was deemed acceptable as it was above the 300 km/h projected speed. The test flights from December 1933 went on during the next year, and the new fighter showed great maneuverability, though because of its small size, short tail, and instability, it didn't tolerate sudden control changes very well. Initial tests in the wind tunnel suggested the aircraft, given its design, would have very bad spin recovery characteristics, but the real-life test showed the opposite. The fighter's main features, the closed cockpit and the retractable landing gear, caused many problems however, and were usually not liked by the pilots. The manually operated landing gear needed 25 crank rotation to release, and required quite an effort from the pilot. The new fighter, though it had excellent maneuverability, was not an easy plane to fly. It was unstable and required constant attention from the pilot. By mid-1934, the production of the Soviet-built Cyclone engines was on the way, so the second and third prototype received these new, stronger Svetstov M25 engines, and the third one, which featured additional aerodynamic improvements, started its trials in September 1934, and it managed to reach 437 km/h top speed. The M22 powered variants entered production at the end of 1934 as I-16 Type 4 models, and the stronger M25 powered variants as I-16 Type 5. The Type 5 at that time was the lightest and fastest production fighter on the world, weighing only 1,460 kilograms and capable of reaching a top speed of 454 km/h. The Polikarpov I-16 was only 6.13 meters long, with a wingspan of 9 meters. It had an empty weight of 1,490 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 1,941 kilograms. It was powered by a Svetstov M63 radial engine, producing 1,100 horsepower. With this engine, it could reach a top speed of 489 km/h, a range of 700 kilometers, and it had a service ceiling of 9,700 meters. The fighter's armament consisted of two 7.62mm machine guns in the engine cowlings and another two in the wings. The wing-mounted machine guns on some models were swapped for 20mm cannons. It could also carry 6 rockets under the wings. The I-16 had many different types during its lifetime, with different engine and armament configurations, and numerous aerodynamic improvements. So we'll do a quick rundown of those, but not going into deeper details. The Type 1 was the pre-production series with the M22 engine, producing 480 horsepower, and it was armed with 2 machine guns. The Type 4 was the production variant. The Type 5 used the stronger M25 engine, producing 700 horsepower. The Type 6 used the newer M25A engine, producing 730 horsepower, and it had reduced weight. The following Type 10 again had a slightly more powerful 750 horsepower M25B engine. This type had an open cockpit, and its armament was increased to 4 machine guns. A modification of the Type 10 was the I-16P, tested with 2 20mm cannons in the nose. The Type 17 variant featured 2 7.62mm machine guns in the nose and 2 20mm cannons in the wings. The Type 18 used the M62 engine with a 2-stage supercharger producing 1000 horsepower, and its armament was 4 machine guns. The Type 19 and Type 20 were experimental versions using different Savon Norov machine guns, but only a few units were built. The Type 21 and 22 were just plans for a variant which featured all armament in the fuselage, but they were not built. The Type 24 was the next big production variant, similar to the Type 18, but the armament in the wings was changed from machine guns to cannons. On top of these production fighter variants, there were numerous ground attack modifications, trainer variants, and different test modifications of the type. Maybe the most interesting was the SPB variant, which was modified as a dive bomber, and used in the so-called Zvezda project. The goal of this project was to attach several different parasite fighters to the 3B3 bombers. The bombers in different configurations carried 2, 3, sometimes even 5 fighters, over and under the wings and the fuselage. The fighters were either connected to fuel tanks on the bomber, or carried additional fuel for themselves, as all of their engines were running the whole time to compensate for the additional weight. The I-16 SPB variants were used in this configuration, carrying 2 250 kg bombs each. They were suspended under the wing of the bomber, and they detached over the target, attacked as dive bombers, and then return to their base on their own. The I-16 entered service with the Soviet Air Force in 1934, and it was their most numerous fighter and saw frontline service until 1942. When it first entered service, its high performance was very intriguing for the pilots. But as it happened in other air forces around the world, the move from the slow and stable biplanes to the faster monoplanes was not a smooth one. The much higher landing speeds, combined with the manually operated undercarriage, caused many accidents. Add to that the instability of the aircraft, and the result was a very high number of aircraft lost in the first year. They first saw combat during the Spanish Civil War, where they appeared in 1936. Their speed and maneuverability quickly gained them a reputation, and they very much outmatched the early fighters on the nationalist side, like the Heinkel HG-51 and the Fiat CR-32. Their speed and better climb rate allowed them to gain the upper hand over the biplanes. Even with the arrival of the new Messerschmitt Bf-109B models in 1937, the I-16 proved to be a good match for the German fighters, though their shortcomings are started to show. Nonetheless, the combat in Spain provided valuable experience, both for the aircraft development and for its pilots. The type also seen extensive use on the Far East. Between 1937 and 1939, many I-16s were delivered to China, amongst other types, after the signing of the Mutual Assistance Pact between the two countries. They also participated in the fighting when the Soviet Union and Japan faced each other in 1938 during the Khalkhin incident on the Mongolian-Manchurian border. The I-16s faced the new Japanese Mitsubishi A5M and Nakajima Ki-27 fighters. Though the I-16s held their own, the Japanese planes and the training of the pilots were clearly superior. By the time World War II broke out in 1939, it was actually established the type more or less exhausted its development potential. Nonetheless, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the I-16 was still the most numerous fighter in the Soviet Air Force. However, the aircraft was already considered obsolete compared to the newer Bf-109 models. The type's short range, limited armament, and vulnerability to enemy fire made it less and less effective. They still had some success against the Luftwaffe, and they had to soldier on because of the low availability of the newer fighters. They could just about hold their own against the Bf-109E models, using the small Soviet fighters' better maneuverability. But the following Bf-109F model was almost 100 km an hour faster, with a better climb rate, acceleration, and a more powerful engine. And things only got worse for the type with the arrival of the even newer German models. But the design of the aircraft, with its rugged construction, was an advantage, as they required little maintenance, and they were used in many roles up until 1943, when they were gradually replaced by the newer, faster fighters. They still continued to serve in secondary roles, mostly as training aircraft, until the end of the war. After World War II, the type was quickly phased out, but some of them flew in secondary roles for a while. The last one was retired from Soviet service in the early 1950s. The plane, which was the most advanced fighter aircraft when it appeared, became already obsolete by the time its biggest challenge arrived, but it successfully held its own as a stopgap solution until newer designs arrived to pick up the fight. The little aircraft paved the way for many that came after, and provided valuable experience for both the designers and pilots. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.